Bharat Pankania, who has been guiding you and me on this programme since January of last year. Bharat, good morning to you.
Hello, good morning, John. Good morning, everyone.
Good to have you back on the programme. Let's start with a couple of questions from me first. We know now that there have been 4.4 million cases of coronavirus here in the UK. We know that more than 127 people have died within 28 days of testing positive for the virus. We know today that the REACT study says that the pandemic through the UK, through their randomised testing, has halved. Infections have halved since March, and we're back to levels of August last year. So where are we in the UK in the pandemic?
So depends on which part of the UK people are living in. Some local authority areas have got pretty good low rates, like 20 per 100,000 or that order. The Southwest has always fared better than the rest of the country. And we've been lucky because we're not densely populated and other good measures that were in our favor. Unfortunately, there are other parts of the country, such as Bolton, Lancashire, that region. And over there, unfortunately, and these are the warning signals, clear warning signals. In the last few weeks, their case numbers have rocketed up. And not only have they rocketed up, but they've gone up in the younger age group, 35, 40-year-olds. Furthermore, also worryingly, they've got a number of parameters showing cases going up in young children. And we need to be watchful because we don't want young people in ITU. That's very important.
We know there's a meeting by SAGE today, the Scientific Advisory Group, who report into the government. And there is obviously, and we'll come to more detail on this during the course of the hour, what has been going on and played tragically on the world's media in India. But this Indian variant of concern, you mentioned two of the places there where it is, at Bradford being a particular point and Bolton being the other. How concerned should we be in the UK about the Indian variant of concern?
So the Indian variant of concern, what it's showing at the moment is that it is gaining dominance whenever it enters the country. So wherever there is an outbreak, it seems to be outdoing the other variants of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Now, what that means is basically it probably is more infectious. The good thing at this point in time is we don't have any indications that it is more disease causing, or worse still, that it is bypassing the vaccines. So the watchfulness, the concern is it appears to be more infectious and making itself the dominant strain. If it is not the Indian one,
sorry to interrupt you. Would that be to supersede the Kent variant, which everyone else is calling the English variant, because it is better at transmitting than the Kent variant that ripped through us in the early part of this year?
That's right. Yes. So, and this is the normal biology of these viruses, whereby there will always be a variant that appears and then that becomes the dominant one. Now, remember, the good news can also be that a dominant variant can be less disease causing. And that is the nirvana that we are hoping for eventually, that a variant emerges that is very dominant but very minor disease causing. Then we know that we're in a very good place. But at the moment, we don't know that, and therefore we are concerned that we keep the Indian one under tight control in case it is more disease causing, and we don't want this to happen, or if it is bypassing vaccines.
Last question on this, and then I'll get to Jane in Keynsham. 08000 855 949 for your question to Dr. Bharat Pankania. But when you look at those pictures, and I know you've been watching it because the last time you spoke, I could hear the crack in your voice about what's going on in India at the moment. When you watch those pictures, when you see people struggling for breath and the scramble for oxygen and the ventilators that are required, it would appear in the media that this Indian variant seems to be more attacking of the respiratory system, and more people are struggling to breathe. What's your take on what the difference is of this particular variant in India?
No, so the trouble is India is a big country with a lot of people. So when you've got millions of people infected, inevitably you will get people who are struggling for breath, which is what we saw in India. We're still seeing, and it isn't that it is more disease causing. In other words, it isn't that it makes you more ill. But the tragedy of India is clear to see that this is a failure of planning, and this is a failure of healthcare planning over many, many decades in India. And also what we are now seeing is consequences of haphazard polypharmacy treatments in India. So, for example, in the UK, we have nice guidelines and a streamlined approach to what we do in Bolton. We will also do in Bristol, etc. In India, it's very much fragmented, and we then see consequences thereof.
Okay. Let's go to Jane in Keynsham. Jane, good morning.
Good morning, John.
Good morning. Barrett's here for your question. Jane, far away.
Good morning, Dr. Barrett Pankania. My question is, with guidelines saying as from Monday you're allowed to hug, and everyone can hug friends, family and colleagues, etc. But there is also now a caveat that says you may not be able to hug them for too long. So is it just a quick micro hug, or is it actually a real bear hug? So it's mixed messaging, really. So obviously with the Indian variant, we do still need to be cautious. Thank you.
Yes. Good morning, Jane. Good morning. Well, Jane, you've hit the nail on the head. And this is a conversation John and I have been having for over a year. And it goes something like this. Just because it's allowed doesn't mean you do it. So my take on getting close and proximal to humans is as follows. Keep your circle small and tight. You may be hugging and being close to other people, but don't have an extensive circle of people that you're getting close to. And make sure that the people that you are getting close to do not also have a large, extensive network away from you. So keep your circle of friends small and tight. That way you will be in a safer place. Because as you say, what is the difference between, the laugh on Twitter was, how do you hug cautiously? Well, you can't. You either do it or you don't. No. And my view is, if you're going to do it, suss out who you're doing it with and keep that circle small. That's the best way forward.
I'm not quite sure, Jane, what a micro hug is. What's a micro hug? Is that like an air kiss where you go, wow? You know,
well, I think well, we did the elbow bump, so it's a quick hug, hello. But I think people are still being quite cautious. I was on the bus yesterday, and an elderly lady was sat 3 seats behind, and she said she's going to see friends and family, but she still feels nervous. And
I can understand that.
We are still cautious.
Yeah, we have been so frightened for a long time that some people will need help to emerge from the lockdown, and we need to address mental health and all those issues. I tell you what the biggest savior is, Jane, which is get immunized. And when you are fully immunized, you are in the best possible position that you can possibly be in. So with respect to hugs and all those things,
I'll have both jabs.
That's good. Be immunized, and then you are in a good place.
Jane, thank you very much indeed. And on that, Barrett, on the immunisation, chances are that most grandparents now would have been jabbed twice. We've got almost 2/5 of the population having had both jabs. But their children, their grandchildren, who may be at school, secondary or primary school, won't have been vaccinated and would have been mixing with lots of other children. And, you know, talking about knowing what your circle is. I've got children. I've got no idea who they're mixing with at school and, you know, all the lines of the chains of those people. Would you let children hug grandparents, unvaccinated children hug vaccinated grandparents?
Yeah, good question, John. So I was quickly noting down that if you are fully immunized, your chances of catching illness and being severely ill are very, very low. So that's really good. I would say there would be in a range between 5 to 10%, no more than that. So around 5 to 10% of people fully immunized will not be properly immune, and they could go on to become ill and have illness. So that you need to be aware of, that even though you have been fully immunized, there is a small chance, a very small chance, in the order of 5, maximum 10%, who have, despite being immunized, are not immune. And we will never know that until they become ill. So what is the best thing to do? And this is the multi-pronged approach to many things, which is you're protected, go easy, do relax, be careful. Don't have an extensive circle of people you're hugging with. So in answer to your question, if you are fully immunized and your children are not, I think it is okay. But be aware that in amongst all of you fully immunized people, there are a few of you, between 5 to 10%, who could get infected and could end up in hospital.
Okay, let's go to Jean in Stoke Gifford. Jean, hi, good morning.
Morning, John. Morning, Doctor.
Fire away with your question, Jean.
Right, Doctor, I belong to a rambling group and we're out doing walking in the fresh air and that. But before COVID, we used to car share. Are we still allowed to do it now, or is there a likelihood of transmission in cars? Most of us are older and have had both jabs.
So the evidence, Jean, is very, very good about being immunized and not transmitting infections in a big way. So nothing is ever 0% or absolute, but the evidence is that if you are immunized, then you are shedding very few viruses. And therefore, to take that step forward, I would say you're all immunized, you're in a good place, you will be shedding very few viruses, so that's also a good place, and you're as safe can be. The rules will be made up and explained as we go along with respect to are you able to car share or no. But scientifically speaking, it becomes safer to share that car. And one more thing you can always do, and you should do anyway going forward, is have good ventilation in your car in case one of you is that unfortunate 5% who didn't mount a good immune response. I hope that helps.
Would it help? Sorry to interrupt. Would it help if you wore a mask in the car as well?
All of those protection measures, of course, they do help. But with respect to the mask, it is important that you wear it, but you wear it properly. I have been advocating since the advent of the variants, the more infectious variants, that people up the specification on the masks and wear them properly. So a better quality mask worn properly is a good thing to do.
Right. Jean, thank you very much indeed. And on masks, Barrett, one of the things that was announced earlier this week was that secondary school children from next week wouldn't have to wear masks in school. And it sort of comes back to the grandparent thing and the fact that so many people are asymptomatic with this thing. Is that a good idea, not to have masks in secondary schools?
Well, where we've got falling rates and numbers, you can understand why the government wishes to relinquish that protection measure. It's understandable. However, in places like Bolton, Lancashire, etc., where the case numbers have shot up, I would say I need to reintroduce all those precautions that we've been taking through the year. So that takes me to the next step, which is going forward, I think we need to have local autonomy with the local health protection teams to dynamically introduce control measures as necessary, if they are necessary. So we don't sit there and wait for Secretary of State for Health and Social Care to announce in Bolton from now on you're going to wear masks. I think that should be delegated to the local teams dealing with the outbreak locally.
Which is something I know you and I have talked about now for many a month. In fact, we talked about this in the summer of last year before we got to the second bump and then obviously the third bump, as it were. And just on that, how many waves have we had in the UK? Because you look at the graphs, we've got April, we've got September, October, and then we get January. And there are three distinct peaks of this thing, but we're always talking of it in two waves.
Yeah, so in my view, it is three distinct shooting up of case numbers. And then when the case numbers had shot up and come down, the come down bit was never flatlining. It was sort of low and bumpy. So we never really got down to very low levels over a sustained 6-month period. Now that we've been immunizing extensively, I expect that we will come down and hopefully stay down mostly. Places like Bolton, Leicestershire, etc. are unusual, but they're not unusual. It's just unfortunate. And we need to not drop our guard, because what happens in India can happen in the UK. What happens in Bolton can happen in Bristol as well.
And we've already, to be fair, Barrett, we've already seen that, haven't we? Because we
Yes.
saw it happening in the middle of December, and by the middle of January, the NHS was on the verge of falling apart completely, and that was in the space of 4 weeks.
Yes, indeed. And it's ever so difficult to get people to be watchful when the case numbers are down, because the narrative is all is well, we've conquered it. And this is unfortunately what India did. India had low case numbers and they made a terrible error, which was we've conquered it. And then everybody dropped their guard and bang, it went completely out of control. So people will call me miserable for saying be cautious, but I'm saying be cautious for a reason.
But then we get to, I'm going to bring in Chris's question in just a moment, but then we get to the heart of where we are as a country right now. I mean, accepting the basic principle that we've discussed over the last 14 months, that nobody's safe until everybody's safe, that we are 4 days away from the third step out of lockdown. And that is a huge step. That is about being inside, eating and drinking and watching movies and theatres and bowling and having people round your house and what have you. It's a huge, huge step. And minded of what you just said of what happened in India, how much of a step is it and how much of a risk is it?
It's a big step. And for people who are fully immunized, all well and good. That's the evidence thus far. For people who are not immunized, they're at risk. Without a doubt, they're at risk. So if you have not been immunized, and even though you are young, it doesn't mean you are impervious to infection. And only, I think a few days ago, tragically, I was watching a BBC program where a 50-year-old contracted COVID and he died. And it was so sad to watch that. So please be careful. We are nearly there. Just endure that caution a little bit longer until you're fully immunized. When you are fully immunized, you're in the best possible place.
On that, you said we're nearly there. Where is there?
Yeah.
So it's already saying we're nearly there. It's like being in the back of a car. Are we there yet? No, we're not. So and you've got no concept of where the destination is. Is that destination there this time next year in the autumn? Where is there?
Yeah. So my parameter is that when a large sector of the population, meaning younger people, are also immunized, we can feel safer. Provided then a curved ball from abroad or from the UK doesn't arise, a curved ball meaning a variant that bypasses vaccines. If a variant that bypasses vaccines or a variant that causes more severe disease occurs, that could be a big headache. So because our immunization program is going very well, once we have immunized 70-80% of our population, I would say we are in a safe place.
Okay, on the subject of that, variants coming from abroad, Chris in World raises the point. To me, it seems the travel industry are more bothered about selling holidays rather than being more cautious about not spreading the virus. Does Barrett have any view on the traffic light system, which of course was announced again, and Portugal being a country which is green, which means you test before you go, and you have to test a couple of times when you come back, but there's no quarantining. What's your view on travelling?
I'm concerned, and I was concerned about it in March 2020, and I remember making noises. I remember saying, whilst we are focusing on people returning from Wuhan district in China, we need to be also focused on any other country in case they're bringing it from elsewhere. And lo and behold, the southeast of England was seeded by people returning from skiing holidays in Italy. And that's how the pandemic was brought to the UK via Italy. And we had no controls of people going to Italy and returning from Italy. So we need to learn that lesson and be aware that you may bring in infection from any part of the world. And if we look at the New Zealand example, they are living lives normally because they were able to shut down their border and do what they did. I appreciate New Zealand has got a tiny, tiny, tiny population compared to the UK. Having said that, if we were to exercise energy in working out what is the best way of keeping infections out of the country, that would be a good preventative tool to use. So what I'm trying to get at is when you are coming from a green country, say like Portugal, you might have gone en route to all sorts of places. And just because you're coming from Portugal doesn't mean you're absolutely safe. We need to exercise caution and care. It's not easy. I appreciate it's not easy, but to do nothing is not a solution either.
I suppose ultimately you have to bear in mind that it's not just the fact that you are travelling from Bristol to Portugal.
Yes.
You are in an airport, which is an enclosed environment where people have been travelling from all over the place. You are arriving at an airport where people have been travelling from all over the place.
Yes.
You've got, I suppose it's variables, isn't it? You are introducing loads more variables of which you have no control over to your risk of infection.
Absolutely. And not only that, but people misbehave. And what I mean by misbehave is when they return back to the country and they're expected to be in self-quarantine at home, I'm finding, because I'm working on this every day, so I know firsthand, I'm finding that they returned from country X, they didn't really observe the quarantine, and then they have gone on to infect others. So these things are happening, these things happen, we can do better.
Let's go to Bert in Hembury. Bert, your question for Barrett, please.
Good morning, Doctor. What it is, my wife has got Hodgkin's lymphoma, and she read in the paper that this person, it was a personal letter in the paper, and this person had his vaccine, the first vaccine, and then a period of time after, he had another test to see what his immune system was, and it was nil. Would that alter with the second vaccine, or will that be ever and a day?
Yeah, good question, Bert, and I'm very happy to reassure you. So what I think you're referring to is Hodgkin's lymphoma. Let's just put that on one side. So this is interesting because even my medical colleagues, some of them are not sure about this, but I'm really happy to answer this question because I know the answer. So
good.
So I'm glad of that.
Yeah. So
me too.
When we immunize you, you may make antibodies, specific antibodies that we may or we may not detect. So the tool used to detect antibodies is not as precise a tool. So in answer to your question, Bert, if you said to me, I was immunized, I can't find any antibodies, what does that mean? And my answer is, don't worry about it, mate. Just because I don't detect the antibodies doesn't mean they're not there. Now, there's one more very important biology that we can teach our viewers and listeners, and it goes something like this. What we want to do is make immune memory. And the immune memory is, if the dastardly virus ever appears, the memory bank produces a surge of antibodies and then neutralizes the virus that has arrived. You don't want your body to be making antibodies when they are not needed. So in peacetime, I might look for antibodies, and if the levels are pretty low, I may not find it. But what I do want to know is that you've got immune memory. So in a roundabout way, to again answer your question, antibody testing post-vaccination is not a good science. It's an imprecise science. A negative presence of antibodies does not mean you're not immune.
Right.
There you go, Bert.
But the only one thing I'd say, would it be advisable to have a test for the antibodies at the moment? Now, she's had her second vaccine about 9 weeks ago, so it's not worth bothering.
Never bother with this antibody tests, because the antibody test is not precise, not specific, and not very informative, because it doesn't tell us what it means. Okay. Yeah. In some cases, I may detect antibodies, all well and good, jolly good. But in some cases where I don't detect antibodies, it doesn't mean you're not immune. So a negative result doesn't mean you're not immune.
Well, you've lightened our load.
There you go, Bert. Here to help, as always. Bert and Hembry, thank you very much indeed. Bharat Pankhania, Dr. Bharat Pankhania, with us until 11 this morning. Still plenty of time for you to get a question answered by Bharat, who's been with us now since January of last year, would you believe? 08000 855 949. More from Dr. Bharat Pankhania in just a moment.
BBC Radio Bristol.
Mum, who just got BBC Radio Bristol Song of the Week?
You did.
I did. Come on.